Reboots, reboots, reboots. So many, all the time, to the point that we are sick and tired of them. Recently, a Powerpuff Girls CW show was greenlit, which sparked a lot of outrage online. And look y'all, most of the time, I am right there with you. I mostly despise reboots. But I really like the idea of this Powerpuff Girls reboot, even if it gets the CW melodrama treatment. I think with Diablo Cody's writing chops, it could be something really incredible as long as it stays true to the original series. And not all reboots are bad. Sometimes they can breathe new life into the original. She-Ra and DuckTales are wonderful examples of that. And technically, Samurai Jack is a semi-reboot continuation which gave a satisfying conclusion to the original show. Personally, I think that in order for a reboot to be successful, it has to do the following: introduce a new aspect to the show that hadn't been done before, and comment on the original in some way. Now let me break down what I mean. When it comes to point 1, this doesn't mean coming up with entirely new characters or drastically changing the plot of the original show, although it can. But at that point, the question is whether it's a reboot or a reimagination. She-Ra, although technically a reboot, has arguably changed so much of the original lore and mythology that I would honestly say it's more of a reimagining than the original property. But I'm gonna leave that up for debate. The reason why I hate the animated 2016 Powerpuff Girls reboot and not this darker, edgier reboot that's being proposed is that the animated reboot didn't do anything other than adapt it to a modern time period, which honestly didn't really set it up all too well for longevity in terms of interesting storytelling. When that reboot was originally announced, I was confused that the girls were just staying the same age, and at the time it felt like relatively little was changing. This of course was false, and actually the show was a massive dumpster fire from the get-go. But what confused me the most about not changing the ages of the characters was that the show was cancelled not only because the team had other opportunities to pursue, but because they literally had no other stories to explore. In a documentary, the original team of the Powerpuff Girls said that there's only so many stories that you can tell with kindergartners, and they didn't want to keep hitting the same notes over and over again. Also, Craig McCracken, the series creator, had to move on to his new idea, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. I honestly think doing something as simple as making the characters significantly older works. Being older means that you have other types of storylines to work with and more drama. That's just kind of a natural progression of getting older. But these characters and the story should still stay true to the original source material. And to make things clear, changing the time period and ages of the characters alone wouldn't work. Adapting something to another time period doesn't really provide longevity. A lot of 90s reboots are like, oh, well, what if we just introduce them to modern day technology? Well, how many wacky stories can you tell around technology before your audience, who lives with said modern day technology, gets bored? While I like the Rocko's Modern Life Netflix film, if the intention of that film was to reboot the entire series, it did not seem like a strong enough entry. Again, I don't know for a fact if it was to reboot the entire series or if it was to just be some kind of follow-up sequel, but if it was to reboot the entire series, again, not a strong enough entry. It was just set 20 years later, and one of the characters came out as trans. And her storyline was great, and I think that she's wonderful, but again, she's a side character, and I don't think that that film introduced any kind of longevity to the idea of a reboot. I get really kind of suspicious of people who say that a show has to be updated for the modern era, and that's all that they have to say. Why isn't the show valuable enough as it is in the current time that it was made? Can't it just be regarded as a perfect little encapsulation of the era it was made in? It just doesn't really work for me. Anyways, on to point 2, commenting on the original. This is less important, but was there a problem with the original content? Did it have something misogynistic, racist, or factually inaccurate? Thinking about the Mulan reboot and what it was supposed to be, it was largely marketed as a more accurate interpretation of the original Chinese tale. But that was absolutely untrue, and I think one of the many things that angered audiences. We thought that we were supposed to be getting a version of Mulan that was truer to the original Chinese tale and source material, and instead, we got whatever the hell that movie was. Dear God, what was that? Ultimately, I think that point 2 is something that can serve as grounds for a reboot if it was a particularly beloved show. I'm also uninterested in reboots which only seek to adapt the animated version to live action or from 2D to 3D. That's boring. I don't care. I don't care, Lion King. I don't care. Also, it doesn't help to make something more feminist. I totally understand wanting to include more diversity, representation, or inclusion in your show. I think that that's important, and I've voiced that a ton of times on this channel, but Powerpuff Girls 2016, are you listening? I find it troublesome to structure your entire show around an ideology because often it comes across as heavy-handed, and not even in an after-school special kind of way, but in oh my god is this bad kind of way. The Powerpuff Girls reboot was boasted as being feminist, and on top of being totally bland and unoriginal, it also ironically eliminated some of the feminist messaging of the original show. For example, it wrote off Miss Bellum because they said that her character didn't align with their messaging, but as critics pointed out, Miss Bellum was a critical character. The point of her was that she was the actual brains in the mayor's office and was calling the shots in a male-dominated world. She was a really important role model to the girls, who were otherwise alone in an era of predominantly male leadership. She is a sexualized character, but you know, that may or may not be the point of her character. We either don't see her face because we're trying to let others project onto her, or we are highlighting the fact that women in positions of power are often dehumanized and sexualized. Which, like, if that was the whole problem with how Miss Bellum didn't fit into the reboot, then just redesign her character and add her face? Why? Also, as another critic pointed out, the professor had very little screen time. The professor, who is one of the most feminist characters on the show, yes, he was. He literally told his daughters that they could do anything and be anything that they wanted to be. He never mocked them for having feelings, and he did a lot of both traditionally male and female roles. He was a key part of the original show. So, I mean, I just have so many questions. But I'm not just here to rant about reboots. Instead, I wanted to talk about shows that I would love to see reboots of, and then eagerly watch you roast me in the comments section. Actually, please don't do that. Please be nice to me. Number 1, Ed, Edd, and Eddy. This show was one of the longest running on Cartoon Network, and for good reason. While it was crude and relied on a lot of gross out humor, Ed, Edd, and Eddy was fun to tune into each week because of its colorful cast of characters. You cared about each and every kid in that cul-de-sac, no matter how mean or weird they could be. And yes, while some people argue that every episode was the same, it centered around a scam, I think that for the most part, it had really clever and unique writing. I have seen people argue that Ed, Edd, and Eddy is dumb, but in actuality, I think it really made some excellent commentary on the social lives of kids. Think about it. A lot of these kids were at home without adult supervision all day long. While you might think that that's normal, it's actually sad to think about how some of these kids were missing their parents and how the absence of adults allowed the bullies to run rampant. Double D shows signs of neglect in how he communicates through his parents primarily through post-it notes. Ed's parents removed the stairs because he was grounded. And in today's day and age, we talk a lot about how removing the door to your child's bedroom is, you know, a violation of their privacy and boundaries. But removing the stairs? By far, Eddy has the saddest story out of all of the kids. Not only is he neglected by his parents, but he really deeply misses his older brother. And throughout the series, we think that this dude is as cool as Eddy claims he is until we get to the film and realize just how abusive the brother is. Eddy is nasty and mean because he was literally taught how to be nasty and mean, and there's no parental figures in his life that really can kind of correct that or show him on a better path. Although Double D does try his best to make Eddy nicer and to make Eddy more of a morally conscious person, and I think that's what's really great, is that Eddy is kind of motivated by his friendships to be a better person. I honestly want to make a video on a later point talking about Ed, Edd, and Eddy. I want to communicate it through subtext and how its writing was actually better than we remember it, but that's not this video. Anyways, for me, the later seasons of the show were my favorite because we got to see them at middle school and it was fun to see the Eds in a new environment and how that complicated things. Unfortunately, this is what I think the original show didn't consider for most of its 10-year or so run. It seemed to center around them mostly during the summertime, possibly weekends, save for, you know, the holiday specials, but I think that this led to some monotony in some episodes. I would love to see a reboot of the show with the same art style, characters, and just expand their world a little. I want to know more about the town of Peach Creek. It could also help to make them older. Many people have tried, mostly unsuccessfully, to do fan reboots of the show with the kids as teenagers. Out of everything that I'm going to mention on this list, I think that fact alone proves just how many fans are craving to see the Eds again. The upcoming Preach Creek, which is kind of like a soft reboot of the series, looks absolutely amazing. It's got a gorgeous yet kind of gritty art style, and the voice actors? Guys, the voice actors are insanely spot on. It's wild. I'm rooting for this little reboot. I'll leave a link to their channel in the description below if you want to check them out, but please give them a chance. I think that this is going to be an amazing little project. Number 2, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. So this is one of my favorite animated shows of all time, hands down, full stop. At one point, it was so popular that it even rivaled the Powerpuff Girls. I think that what I loved about the opening film, or the 90-minute pilot for the series, was that it was a darker take to a children's cartoon before Adventure Time was even on the air. Mac, the protagonist of Foster's Home, was an 8-year-old being raised by a single mother who was so busy with work that she ended up neglecting her kids. Mac was also bullied and relentlessly abused by his brother Terrence, and then he was forced to give up Blue, his best friend and only savior, from said abuse. Yo, Craig, we gotta talk. Why does the mom do this? It's just straight up cold. In the series opening film, we see this little 8-year-old boy dealing with things that go far over his head, all for the love of his best friend. The series itself was less darker than the film, but was filled with wonderful adventures, colorful characters, and tons of funny jokes. Some of them being super adult. Like, some of the adult jokes on this show are just like, my god, like, it's just amazing. The writing on the show was honestly amazing. And the best part was that it was a show that was just entirely based around relationships, which was something that was rarely seen in children's television. Yes, you had shows that were about friendship, but there was also something typically in the backdrop, and I think that Foster's is actually just kind of more slice of life in retrospect, because it's literally just about the everyday daily adventures of these people running this home. But the one thing that I think that this show suffered from, Blue. I love Blue. He's the entire reason that this show exists, so I can't say, God, I hate this character so much, I wish he wasn't here. But he's like too much of a jerk to Mac, and he never learns from his mistakes, which is much to the frustration of the audience. It's just a little annoying and predictable that you can count on him to be the catalyst for the episode's problems for like 50% of the series run. I think it would be wonderful to see a reboot of the show that is more story-driven and continuous and adds more character development. Like, what if Mac had to worry about making sure that Blue didn't get adopted, but also about making sure that the home didn't run out of money and close down? What if that resulted in some of the series' closest friends being adopted and gone from the show for long periods of time? How do you adjust to that kind of loss? These are the things that I think were kind of touched on a surface level in the beginning of the show, but I think that they could have gone so much deeper and so much harder onto it, especially given the dark tone of the series opener. Like with Finn in Adventure Time, I would love to watch Matt grow up and learn to stand up for himself. I think that if it leaned into some of the darkness of the original pilot or even the TV special Destination Imagination had, it could make for an enthralling reboot. And unlike Powerpuff Girls, I think it was a shame that Foster's was canceled when it was. I think it had so much more life to it, and I think in today's era of serialized television, it would be perfect. Number 3, Whatever Happened to Robot Jones? This little series is kind of a cult hit, and unfortunately, did not run for as long as it should have. It focused on the life of Robot Jones, a robot who was sent to attend a human school in a 1980s version of Rhode Island. As you watch the show, you may notice that there's a lot of intricate world building, but it's really subtle. But it's really cool because it's kind of immersive, and it's definitely different from a lot of the things that were airing on Cartoon Network during the early 2000s. There's even, and this is according to the Lost Media Wiki, so please take it with a grain of salt, there's a cancelled episode that was supposed to explore the setup of this super mechanical world. In retrospect, this series was really ahead of its time. Robot uses he/him pronouns, but doesn't seem to really care about gender norms, and it's debatable as to whether or not he actually identifies as a boy or if he just doesn't have a gender. Shannon, his love interest, was a girl with a mechanical leg and had braces. And unlike a lot of love interests during this era, she wasn't super glamorous or pretty. She was just, an ordinary girl, which I think was super cool. I mean, really, what a positive message to communicate to young girls, that they can still be regarded as pretty and likable and kind of popular. Shannon was kind of popular, regardless of how they look. I don't know if that was really the intention of her character design, but I'm still gonna give the show props for that. I mean, like, you guys did something that no one else had done, and I don't think I've seen anybody with a mechanical leg since in animation, unless I was to count like Finn from Adventure Time with his arm, but that's beside the point. Anyways, I think Robot Jones could actually translate really well to today. Personally speaking, when I was binging the show back when I was working as an intern for Kotaku and spending my days either playing video games, in between playing video games, I would like just look up episodes of the show. And I went on a fan fiction kick and I wrote a story about how Robot and his friends in the 90s returned to their hometown after college graduation and they tried to run a video game studio. But someone from their past was out for revenge and they had to figure out who was trying to kill them and like destroy their idea of a startup. I never finished the story, but I really just like the idea of a startup game studio in the 90s since that was such a transformative time and set the foundation for video games today. And it was just really cool to think about Robot and his friends working on it. I think a Robot reboot wouldn't necessarily need an age up like I proposed. I think you could still have the characters be middle school aged. While Robot could potentially work as a superhero show, I kind of wouldn't want to see that, as it would eliminate some of the slice of life aspects that I enjoyed about the original work. I'm not ashamed to say that I think it could benefit from an edgier, darker reboot, considering, and again, this is based on the Lost Media Wiki, take it with a grain of salt, but allegedly the series was supposed to end with Robot Jones taking over the world. Pretty dark if you ask me. I don't agree with making him a villain since he seems to be such a sweet character, although he's certainly had fantasies about becoming a supreme ruler, but I would love to follow a robot through his middle school years, exploring how he interacts with humans and how he grapples with understanding humanity and morality. What or who would motivate him to take over the world? And would he actually go through with it? And would he stay as the ruler of the world? I mean, my God, guys, this just seems so fascinating to me. I think it could really benefit from being rewritten as a mystery show and have a continuous plot instead of closed episodes, which are now pretty dated for audiences. Kids don't really want to see that anymore. Kids are into more adult, grittier storytelling, and I kind of agree with that. I'm glad we made that transition. And again, I think that Robot Jones has a lot of potential, and unfortunately, I think it encountered far too much network meddling to realize it in the first place. And the original creator has also said, allegedly, that he would be interested in rebooting the show, but since Cartoon Network owns the rights to it, it's really their call. And I personally hope that if that's still the creator's wish, that one day it'll be granted. Number 4, My Life as a Teenage Robot. I think that My Life as a Teenage Robot is a pretty obvious choice on this list, but I'm including it anyways because I believe that a reboot would be really incredible. Rob Renzetti is just such an amazing figure in this industry, and I feel like he's done a lot of things with a bunch of different shows, but I would really love to see him at the helm of his own show again, regardless if it's a My Life as a Teenage Robot reboot or not. I think that you could give this the superhero treatment and make it geared towards an older audience instead of just a general all ages audience like it was on Nickelodeon. I also feel like My Life as a Teenage Robot introduced a lot of questions about the series and about the relationships between the characters that were never answered, like, what's up with Jenny and Sheldon? What's going on with Jenny and Brad? Is this a love triangle? Is this not? These are questions that must be discussed. Number 5, I think. I don't know anymore. I've lost count. I can't count. I'm too gay. Anyways, it's Camp Lazlo. I think that this would be a good show to reboot because unlike its more recent counterparts such as Summer Camp Island, Camp Lazlo really captured the spirit and fun of camp. It was fun, wacky, and had a really good cast of characters, and unlike the others on this list, I honestly think that you could reboot it as is. You don't even have to age up the characters or change the content. You could just, bring it back, and it could be one of those casual shows that you just watch in between waiting for more episodes of Craig of the Creek or something. Or they could give it a Gravity Falls-esque treatment and make it more serious in parts and maybe add in a continuous plot. I mean, how did Lumpus, a convict on the run, end up as the counselor of the camp? Who was the real counselor? What happens to the kids? What happens to the kids at the end of this series? What happens to them when they try to go back to camp again? I think that there's just so many things that you could do with Lazlo. Now, on to number 6, I think. Okay, sorry. On to my most controversial choice for a reboot. I fully understand your anger and I accept it. Star versus the Forces of Evil. Yes, I am fully aware that Star only ended a few years ago, but for the basis of the last few seasons being a mess alone, I think it needs a reboot with more skilled writers. Star had a lot of potential, both in its action scenes and in its drama, but by the time that Eclipsa takes the throne, I felt like a lot of the episodes came across as pointless and meandering. Despite them now fully immersing themselves in a fantasy dimension, the later seasons have absolutely none of the series' original magic in them. The series explored a racism storyline with humans versus the monsters, which was interesting and ambitious for a Disney Channel show, but a little preachy and also a little rushed and forced. I personally am kind of weirded out by racism allegories in children's stories when kids in real life experience racism and could handle those stories by themselves. I mean, we've proven that kids can handle those by themselves without like weird animal allegories like we found in Zootopia. I mean, That's So Raven did an episode on racism way back in the day, so I'm just like, these kind of stories are weird and I don't think that we really have a place for them in 2021, but I'll give them props for it, I guess. Certain plot lines, such as Marco being a post-apocalyptic hero, are just kind of dragged out when they want it to be, and when they want it to be convenient. And then there's just like this most random love triangle between Star, Marco, and then Star's ex-boyfriend, Tom, who I love, and he's just a bean. And then maybe you guys are sitting there thinking that it's not a love triangle, but a love square, for those of you who think Tomko could have actually been a thing. I'm not a big Tomko shipper, but like, I see your guys' point, and I'm with you, and I support you. But I think that this whole fiasco with this relationship, like love triangle that the series focused on so much, was so confusing because Star literally gets back with Tom, who like, sweetie, didn't you like date him when you were 12? Like, why are you so compelled to date a man that you dated when you were like 12 again? But also some of the series' original villains, like Ludo, who I really loved, are kind of just pushed to the back and forgotten about. Like, if you weren't going to use them in your later seasons or have them play out any kind of relevancy in your plot whatsoever, why not just give them a permanent happy ending and write them off the show? Same thing with some of the side characters like Jackie, Jana, and whoever the hell Marco's friends were. Speaking of those guys, why were they hardly ever used? To me, the series was at its strongest and most engaging when we had a ton of different characters to invest in, and when it took place in the human world. But unfortunately, the love triangle was prioritized the most at the end of the series. Oh, and that reminds me, the ending. The ending was abysmal and infinitely depressing. They literally opted to end all magic, therefore killing a ton of characters who use magic. Hekapoo being one of them, those other two a-holes on the Magic Council being another. All of those sweet, adorable little puppies. They committed genocide, y'all. Actual genocide. Thanos would be sitting there like, damn, this is too much. And the thing that really makes me angry about it is that most of this violence was perpetuated by Queen Moon, who was so petty that she was willing to kill Eclipsa and her entire family in the process. Like, really? You didn't think that hiring trash bandit Sailor Moon to lead your rebellion would backfire on you? Like, you're so full of it. You are so full of it. And we just kind of let her get away. She just, she used that as her excuse, and we're like, that's fine. That's fine. No, are you kidding me? What? But also the drama. I live for the drama on this show. I was one of the people that actually just loved the shipping wars. I thought it was so interesting. But I know that some people became frustrated with that love triangle aspect, and especially towards the end of the show, I did too. Tom, who had a tremendous amount of character growth, was just put through the ringer, and all for Star and Marco to end up together, not in the last season, but in the very last episode, like in the series finale? Pfft, no way. It would have been so much more interesting for Star and Marco to begin the relationship at an earlier point and have the series finale be where their relationship is put to the ultimate test. To have their relationship suddenly start during the finale felt so messy, unnecessary, and distracting. And for me personally, didn't have a ton of payoff because my whole wish as an audience member was to see how they tackle problems together as a couple. And look, we do a lot of slow burn romances in animation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's personally important for kids to see what a healthy romantic relationship looks like with people their own age. Star had the opportunity to do that, have it make sense, and yet didn't take that chance, much to the series' detriment. I've also seen other fans of the show say that they don't think Star and Marco should have ended up together at all, given how toxic Star could be. And I'm a Starco fan, but I think that that would be another interesting idea to explore, and I think that those people are right to an extent. I mean, think about a storyline where maybe they date, but they break up and realize that they still love each other as friends, and that's what unites them in the final battle. I think that could be wonderful in its own way too. Now, to be clear, I would not want it to have a live action reboot. I don't think that the series' wackiness would lend itself well to a live action reboot, and I like the fact that these were young teenagers growing into themselves, not little edgelords. I would like to see the show again from start to finish, but this time, not lean so much into the whole killing Eclipsa plot, and perhaps introduce other villains. I think you could still have Queen Moon be a villainous figure, but you can't have her redeemed so easily in the end. I would also love for them to have helped Eclipsa take back the throne, and maybe just return to the human world and introduce another conflict, because oddly enough, living in a magical world was super boring when magic got them into all kinds of trouble in the human world. Now, to be honest, while I'd like to see all of these reboots, I wouldn't like to see these over new original content. I respect that these shows were successful, aside from Star. I'm not even gonna kid there. I respect that these shows, aside from Star, were successful in their own right, and were good for their time period. They can still stand on their own. But I really just wish that the film industry would take a more holistic approach to reboots, rather than just greenlighting anything in sight. There are some shows that I think could really benefit from a reboot, and others which would not, or wouldn't even translate well to modern time. I mean, imagine rebooting the Flintstones as a Sopranos-style family drama. Who would be interested in that? Oh, no. Please don't do that, Cartoon Network. That was a joke. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. Anyways, thank you for watching this very rambling video. If you don't like any of the reboots that I suggested, that is okay. But I want to see, what sort of shows would you be interested in seeing a reboot of? What kind of wonderful thing did you see back in the day and you're just like, oh man, I have a plan for this and I would love to see this on the screen again? Leave a comment down below, and thank you so much for watching. Bye! I'd like to give a very special shout out and thanks to my patrons, AceWolf741, Deep Dive Dylan, Brian White, Deevil J, Caleb Putnam, Robin Harper, Bob Conway, and Cody Webb.